So we'll start off with the joke. So hey, hey, Steve Pucelik, do you know which rock group has four men who don't sing?
Oh man. No. Hit me on that one, Tony.
Mount Rushmore.
Of course.
It was a President's Day inspired joke.
Very good.
Well, Tony, you
going
said
in
that
the
was
junk
a
box.
you said it was a bad dad's joke, and you were correct.
Yep.
So I'm gonna get the recording started. So if no one wants to be recorded, feel free to drop off, and you can participate afterwards. Okay. So it looks like it's already set. So we're good there. So good afternoon, as I said. So so today's topic is knowing and defending your data in the age of generative AI. It's part 2, and it's about balancing data privacy and Copilot with Microsoft SharePoint Premium. So as the SLG availability of Microsoft 365 Copilot approaches, one of our customers' biggest challenges is preparation. Agencies can have years of documents hosted in SharePoint Online, and preparing for Copilot means deciphering years of permissions and document links. So join us with guest speaker Steve Pucelik to learn how SharePoint Premium's Microsoft Syntex and sensitivity labels can address all this scale of this requirement. So Steve, I'm going to hand it over to you. And just as a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to put it into the chat window, and if we've got time at the end, we'll open up the floor for verbal questions. So Steve, it's over to you.
All right, appreciate it, Tony, and thanks everybody for joining. What I'm going to focus on today is SharePoint Premium and some of the features that we have, not only within SharePoint Premium, but within the how it incorporates with the Purview and the governance compliance portion that you have established within your tenant. And what are some of the best practices, some of the things that we're seeing on the commercial side that, quite frankly, are going to help you on the GCC side once the Copilot functionality has been introduced. So again, my name is Steve Pucelik. I am a content services global black belt, and I focus on not only the SharePoint Premium stack, SharePoint Premium, SharePoint as a whole, but also a lot of document automation and how that fits into the broader M365 platform to include Power Platform, Purview, and Entra. So hopefully there's some little good tips in the toolbox that we're going to focus on today, and walk through a lot of those capabilities that are in your tenant today or going to be in your tenant shortly. And I'll go through the distinction of making sure what is available in GCC today and what are some of the features that are coming here shortly. Okay. Like Tony said, keep the chat active. Come off mute if you have any questions. We'll just kind of keep this as a more of a discussion than anything else. Okay. I always like to start with a bit of a reminder of how much content is really being added to the Microsoft 365 cloud every day, right? So think about this. 2 billion documents are added to M365 daily. Of that, pretty much all of it's going to be unstructured. Security is where things are going to really matter, not only from protecting the content that we have, but also using those generative AI tools that we have in our toolbox or going to be in the toolbox today. So storing and managing the content is a expense. It's a real expense that organizations are dealing with today. What is an inactive content? How do we get rid of it? How do we identify it? We're going to go through some of the tools that we have to not only expose what that risk is, but automated tools to reduce that. So not only does it reduce the overall technical debt that you may have, but it's also going to reduce that risk exposure that you have from a compliance standpoint and also from a discoverable standpoint. So we're going to focus on that as well. And more importantly, how are we going to position the content that you already have for use with Copilot, with any of the generative AI tools, and quite frankly, with any of the permission-based activities that you're doing today. Okay. So this is going to be my grounding slide that we're going to come back to frequently so that we can get a really good idea of what is in the SharePoint Premium toolbox and how those features are being defined. I will, note again that a lot of what I'm going to talk about is available in GCC today, so you can start to prepare your content for what's coming. But also, more importantly, as you're continuing on with that governance and compliance journey, what are some of the things that you can use to complement those activities? Okay. So back in November, we announced that SharePoint Premium is going to be a new SKU. So it's going to be a bundle of products that are happening there. Currently, we have a lot of the SharePoint Premium features that are available. A lot of them are available in GCC, but the SKU hasn't been defined yet. So I kind of want to clear the air here really quick on what exactly SharePoint Premium is and what it's going to become. So from a historical perspective, if we look at the Microsoft Syntex family of products, all we really did with Ignite is we renamed that to SharePoint Premium to better align with that SharePoint brand that we all know and love, but the functionality is the same. The pricing is going to be the same according to what we have established already. So we're realigning everything into that SharePoint Premium brand, and we are going to be releasing a SKU that's going to bundle or have those features with that. So that's going to be announced here probably in the next 30 to 60 days. But from a alignment perspective, think of it as really aligning everything to that SharePoint brand. Okay. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start to focus on some of the tools that we have that will, first of all, identify and classify some of the content you have. But then more importantly, how do we assign those sensitivity labels? How do we start to protect it? And what does that mean when Copilot or those generative AI tools start to interact with it? And that's where we're going to focus initially on the document processing side of things. Within document processing, we have the ability to not only classify what kind of document it is, but then we can extract the metadata out of the document to use that later on. But more importantly, we can also apply that sensitivity label that you have configured in Purview to the document at the time of processing. So if we look at what that content management lifecycle looks like, from an ingestion standpoint, you may have a lot of content currently in SharePoint today. You may be migrating that in. You may be migrating that from a competitive product, but it's going to land in SharePoint, which is where a bulk of the content is going to live that we're seeing. When it's in those document libraries in SharePoint, this is where the AI models will look at the content of the document according to the rules that you configure. And we're going to walk through that here in just a second. But now that you've identified what kind of document it is based on that rule set, now take and apply that sensitivity label to that document automatically. Okay, so this is where the real power of the AI meets Purview in the sensitivity labels is nobody's looking at the document 1Z, 2Z or in bulk to determine, well, is this an invoice or is this a contract and how long do I keep it and what's the sensitivity label that goes on it. As you define what that governance is, now you can automatically apply that to existing documents or new documents that are coming into a library. Okay. So I'm going to bounce out of the deck, and I've got a few demos that I'm going to augment this with as well. All right. So once we are in a document library in SharePoint, so this is my SharePoint environment that we're going to refer to throughout the call. But if I go to a document library that has sensitive content in it, and this may have content that I'm going to determine is highly confidential, it's kind of just internal only confidential, or it's sensitive in nature. So I've defined what those sensitivity labels are in Purview. And when I add the document to the library, this is where the models will look at the content of the document. And in this case, I've got a confidential cover sheet that's on my document, it's going to automatically determine what kind of information is in there and assign that sensitivity label. So if I have a confidential document, it's going to be confidential internal only. But if I have a top secret document, for instance, that's going to be highly confidential. That's something that we don't want to get out. What users do is simply add the document to the library. And what you as administrators or power users of the tool can do is configure those models to automatically look at that document. So you'll notice that when I'm in my document library, I've got this classify and extract button on the icon, on the ribbon. And what this allows you to do is configure those models to determine what kind of document is it, how do I want to label it, and if you want to pull out some metadata to use that later on for searching, you can certainly do that as well. Okay? So let's take a look at how that is built. And I'm going to walk through this in pretty short order. So when I click the new button in that screen that we just saw, this is where I'm taken to. This will allow you to configure this model in 4 steps to apply it to your document library. And you can have more than one model in that library. We recognize that you're going to have a mix of documents that are going to be in the library, and you need to be able to identify, hey, is this going to be sensitive, highly confidential, whatever the case is there. Again, 4 steps. First step is getting a sample of what we expect to go into that library. Okay, back to organization. You're going to organize your documents or libraries according to like documents. Invoices are going to be in the invoices library, and purchase orders are going to be in the purchase order library. But generally, you're going to not commingle those, just so you can kind of keep some sense of order. 5 sample documents is really all you need. If you're using a lot of complicated documents, contracts get to be a little complicated, you may find yourself needing 20 or 30 sample documents to properly classify those, but you don't need thousands or millions like you do on some of the predictive models. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to classify this document. So on the left-hand side, we have our sample documents. On the right-hand side, we have an OCR output of what that document is. This is where we're taking that document, normalizing it down. So if we have any of the Office documents, great. PDF images, JPEGs, TIFFs, you name it, we'll OCR that. And you'll see that on the right-hand side. All we're doing is telling the model, hey, is this a secret document or not? Because this is the model that I'm going to use to classify my secret documents. Okay. Once I've done that for each one of my documents, now I've got the ability to train it. So I need to tell the model, you told me this is a secret document, so what am I looking for that indicates that? So on the cover page I've got secret on the cover page, or I've got highly confidential, top secret, whatever the case is there. Those are those words and phrases that we're looking for. So very much as if you were going to open the document manually, you're looking at that, you're trying to determine what kind of document is this. You're looking for keywords and phrases and that type of pattern to determine what kind of document is it, so that now I can determine how I want to handle this. Okay. The models are doing the same thing. As we train those models, we want to have that be as predictive as we can. Again, the more sets of samples you have, the more accurate that's going to be. Oops. And if we can mute if you not have a question, that'd be appreciated. So once we have our explanations or rules that we're going to use to identify what kind of document that is, we train the model. It's going to use that against our sample documents. So again, that's where having a good representation of those sample documents comes in handy. And we ever see our outcome. It's a positive match, meaning that, yeah, what you told me is in the document, and I've got an accuracy rate of 100%. Okay. This tells the model that we do have secret documents. Okay. And normally you can stop here because we're going to apply that sensitivity label here in a second. or you can go and do some extracting. So you know that you want to pull out certain information from the document, you can pull that out as well. But what I really want to focus on is the settings of the model. So in this case, we're dealing with secret documents. This is the default sensitivity label that you're going to apply to that document, okay? Because as we're publishing those labels in Purview, this is what we're going to use to assign it to that document. If you wanted to assign a retention label, you can do the same thing as well. So we know that we're having, confidential documents. We're going to keep those for, a certain period of time, assign that sensitivity label. But from a governance perspective, you're controlling that in Purview. So you're standardizing on that across your tenant. We're using the classification of these models to determine, does it meet that specific criteria? If it does, apply that label automatically. And where this really comes into play and has lasting benefits is when you start to use Copilot, it will recognize the sensitivity label in the document. And when you have multiple documents that are being used for that generative AI, it's going to interrogate those sensitivity labels. It's going to look at the settings of those labels. What can and can't you do? I'm going to take the most restrictive label. I'm going to place it on that newly created document so that now I don't have to jeopardize any confidential information that may be in that document. Okay? So this is where the models have the ability to be trained against your content, put them back into the library. So as you publish that model, it's going to publish it back to the document library. And again, any new documents that go in there, it's going to process that. If it met the criteria of the model that we just walked through, it's going to automatically apply that sensitivity label. And then Copilot will use that and honor that sensitivity label going forward. You have a bunch of existing documents, which I know we all do. You'll notice I'm selecting everything. If I hit that classify and extract button, I'm doing a batch process so that the models can interrogate all of those documents, look to make sure that they are using the configuration that we published, and again, assigning that sensitivity label to the document automatically. So that when you open that document, again, you're going to see that sensitivity label automatically applied. And we'll see it come here in a second. There we go. And it's highly confidential because I've got a cover sheet that says top secret in this case, not confidential. Okay. All right. So I'll pause there if there's any thoughts or questions. Very good. Okay. All right. So from a document processing standpoint, I'll kind of reground us here to our wheel. Document processing, take existing documents that you have in your estate, smartly process those, use those Purview sensitivity labels. This is a complement, not a replacement, another tool that you have in your toolbox with trainable classifiers or auto labeling that you may have in Purview today. Absolutely, everything has a place, but with the document processing capabilities in SharePoint Premium, gives you added capability of identifying those documents in a library or multiple libraries. If you're keeping sensitive documents with top secret cover sheets in multiple libraries, apply that model to all of the libraries where it may be. It'll process them all exactly the same. If you need to modify that for any reason, modify it, republish it. All of the libraries receive those changes automatically. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm going to move on to OCR capabilities. Okay, and we're not going to. I'm not going to cover everything because some of them, simply don't have an applicability to preparing your content for that generative AI era that we're embarking on. But the ones that I'm going to cover certainly do. And the next one is going to be OCR, and this is best explained through a quick demo. Because with OCR, traditionally in your SharePoint environment, we have not looked inside the body of an image and taken that content and indexed it in SharePoint. In the on-prem days, there were some plugins that you could use to do that, but in the online environment, that's not hasn't been possible until now. So when you add a JPEG, PNG, TIFF image, PDF image to a library, with the OCR capabilities, we will take that document and we'll process that, automatically OCR the entire document. There is a new column that will be created called extracted text, oddly enough, and the contents of that document will now be placed in that column, which is then picked up by the SharePoint indexer. Okay, so now you can search for content in those documents. And I picked this one for obvious reasons. It's handwritten. It's in cursive, which is a little hard to read sometimes. Okay, but if we look at what the outcome is here, we're pretty spot on. Okay, so some of the words that I'm having a hard time reading, I can see that the OCR engine picked those up in good order. Okay, and you can see that there's a lot of different images that you can use. A lot of these are going to be more cursive in nature, but when you add that document to the library, it recognizes that it is an image and is going to extract that text for you automatically.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Again, if you have a question, please come off mute. Otherwise, if you could mute yourself, that would be appreciated. Okay. All right. So that's one thing to consider with OCR. And as we're OCRing the content and extracting that into the column, this is where sensitive information types. So in Purview, when you have sensitive information types created, as you're extracting that content, now it's going to look at that extracted content, determine if there's any PII information, any sensitive information that you've defined as a sensitive information type, and it will protect that document for you automatically. So you'll see the little, the indication that there's sensitive information in there, and that, again, will be protected. Okay? So honored by Copilot. So when you're doing your Copilot prompts in generative AI, it's going to recognize that there is some sensitive information there to consider. Right? Another area where we're seeing OCR applicable is in Purview. So when you go to Purview, you have the ability to configure Purview to OCR information and apply sensitivity label automatically. Where we see a lot of activity here is when you're receiving an email, we'll look at the body of the email for an image. We'll look at an attachment of an email for an image. We'll OCR that. If it's determined that there is PII information in there based on those sensitive information types, we're going to automatically apply a label to that straight away. Okay, so the user doesn't need to look at the image, open up any attachments. The pipeline of email coming in will automatically do that for you. So this has huge compliance implications. If you're a regulatory, need to comply for some regulatory rules and laws and things like that, this is where that is going to be very beneficial. So not only from a SharePoint perspective can you do that, but also from a email and content management perspective as well. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm going to move on from a OCR perspective, and we're going to spend a bit of time on the SharePoint Advanced Management capabilities. And this is where we see the most impact to preparing and identifying content within your tenant that may need to have some remediation done before you get into the generative AI area. Okay? And there's a series of tools that come with SharePoint Advanced Management, and I'm going to touch on many of them here. Again, I've got another process wheel that we're going to ground ourselves with. Initially, when you're embarking on that journey, all of us have a lot of content. All of us have kind of brought that content with us over the years. And we may not have done a fantastic job of securing the content. We didn't know that at the time because we're only searching for what we normally are looking for, but there's a lot of sites and there's a lot of libraries where everyone's in the visitors group, and now Copilot is going to start to expose that because it's very much permissions based. Okay, and it's very much looking at how many items have been shared, but finding that has always been a little difficult. We've all got large tenants. We've all got, millions of documents that are in the tenant, but how do we go through and determine what's been overshared and how do I get control of that? And we've got some telemetry and some reporting that will help with that. We'll walk through that here in a second. So that's step one. Where's the problem? Step two is acknowledging that, yeah, we probably have a little room for opportunity here. Well, what do we do about it? Okay, I've got 10,000 site collections. I can't go through 10,000 site collections in short order and figure out what I need to do to remediate that. So we've got some controls that you can put on that to kind of stop the bleeding, if you will. And we'll walk through what some of those controls are so that you can secure the site right now, but yet get some time so that you can go through and figure out what that permission posture looks like and correct that from there. Lastly, what we'll talk about is that site lifecycle management. You've got a lot of content out there. Chances are that content's been there for a number of years. Nobody's touched it, but you don't have a great idea of what is out there. If you need to keep it, are there regulatory reasons you need to keep it? Can you just go ahead and delete it? People need to look at that, but they need to look at it in a smart way. Don't tell them to go and look at all of the site collections that they own, because half of them could be active that don't need any attention. So we're going to walk through some of those specific policies you can create, identifying what that content is, and then you can safely delete that, or the site owner can, because they know what the site is all about. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start the journey first by going through what are some of those collaboration insight reports that we have so that you can determine what kind of oversharing is happening in the tenant. And that's where I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds here, because we're going to the SharePoint Admin Center. And when I go to the SharePoint Admin Center, we have this advanced management capability down at the bottom. Again, everything I'm going to show you is in GCC right now, so this is something that you can take advantage of today. This brings us to the menu of options and features that are in SharePoint Advanced Management. Specifically, we're going to focus on the data access governance reports initially. This is where we have a couple reports, and we've got more that are coming that I'll explain here in a second. From a sharing perspective, what sites have been shared with other folks? So imagine you're going into a site, you're hitting that sharing button, and by default, it's people in your organization. How many sites are out there, and how many sharing links have been created? That could be pretty valuable information, because if I create a sharing link, now I can send that link to anybody in the organization. If I've got everyone in the visitors group on that site, anyone who gets that sharing link can now see the content that's in the site. If that site has confidential information, you can see what the sensitivity label is, what the device posture is, and if there's external sharing turned on. So even worse is I've got 10,000 people that now have this link. Somebody starts sharing that externally. External people click on that link, they come back, they see the payroll report, they see confidential information within the organization. Having telemetry on what that exposure looks like has always been very, very difficult. You got to go through each site. You got to go through all of the links that have been created on the site and produce that report. Chances are you're going to get throttled. You're going to get timed out. You're not going to get to the point where you have that information at scale. And that's what SharePoint Advanced Management will do, is it will go through not only all of your sites, all of the files that have been accumulated on those sites, and that could be hundreds of millions of files. We totally understand that. And that's why we can do this at scale. And I ran this report yesterday, and it took about 5 minutes. Okay. Granted, I've got a smaller environment, but on some of the larger tenants, we're seeing that telemetry come back in less than an hour. Depending on the site that you have, this is where you want to focus on what that looks like. We've also got another report on sensitivity labels that have been applied to files. Okay? So you'll see all the sensitivity labels that I've created within my Purview. If I click on highly confidential, for instance, I'm going to be presented with a Excel report. And let's open this up. And this will tell me what the position is for those particular sites. Okay. So here I've got my sites. And you'll notice that the admin is here. I've got a number of files that have been labeled. Oh, by the way, I've just got a general sensitivity label on that, and I may be sharing that externally. Okay? Again, what does that look like? How many files do I have labeled? And what is my risk of exposing that internally or externally? So in this case, I don't have any site sensitivity turned on, but I have files that are labeled, and on managed devices, anybody can get in on any kind of device and see that. Okay. Again, telemetry into how exposed am I and what can I do about that? That's going to be our next step. What are some of those controls that we can put in place? Okay. But we first need to know where some of that oversharing is happening within our tenant. Then we can move on to securing that. Okay. Some other reports that we are coming up with. You'll notice that these are more focused on oversharing. Heavy emphasis on sharing. We've also got reports that are being created on over permissioning. So if the use case here, how many sites do I have in my tenant where everyone's in the visitors group? That's probably important to know, because as Copilot goes and looks at the content, it will absolutely look at the permissions that are on that content. If I've got permission to it, I want to be able to use that in Copilot. That's part of the features and the goodness of Copilot, discovering the information that I have access to. Flip the coin over, and it's like, holy smokes, I have access to what? That's where the permissioning that people have done or not done over the years starts to be exposed. And that's where identifying that and getting control of what that permissioning model looks like is only going to enhance and secure that Copilot experience. Okay? And that's where we have a lot of those reports that are coming to help support that and use within your environment. Okay. All right. Question, please.
Steve, you mentioned the Copilot and its use a couple of different times. Would you please describe that a little bit more? Because I'm trying to understand how get a better handle on how the two of them would integrate, how this information would be related to the content that Copilot would consume, and essentially what am I getting out of it?
Yep. So what these reports identify is how many links are being shared. So let me go into, let's just go into here, for instance. So if I hit my sharing button in my SharePoint environment today, by default, this is going to be people that you choose or people in my organization. Okay. Having exposure to that is important. Okay. So for instance, if I go in and I share this with a security group that's got 1,000 people in it, well, now 1,000 people have access to this content. And they forward it on to a number of other people. So I can copy this link and I can send it to 2 or 3 other people, whoever I want to have look at this particular content. That starts to expose your risk. And that starts to have people with that link who maybe shouldn't have that link. But having the telemetry to identify who's got that link and which sites do I need to focus on that have the most exposure so that I can fix the permissions, or I can remove those links so that they expire. That's what we're after here initially, because Copilot is absolutely going to pick that up and use that within that experience.
Hey, Steve.
Yes, sir.
Just to quickly interject, we have a couple hands up, so I don't know if now's a good time to pause and take those questions, or if we should wait. Okay, cool. Tanya, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So,
Hey,
Tanya, please.
Hi. So just to confirm, this SAM tool is only available once you have the SharePoint Premium.
So this tool is available today using the SharePoint Advanced Management license. So there is a per user license that's associated with this, and you can buy it standalone and use it within your tenant today.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Richard, question?
Looks like we actually have a question in the chat that I wanted to grab for you. It's any restrictions on the amount of existing old documents that you can apply sensitivity labels to via SharePoint Premium?
No, so we have an SLA that we can process up to 1 million documents per day, and apply sensitivity labels to those documents as well. So no limit there. Okay. Alrighty. Okay. And I'm not able to see the chat for some reason, so if there's other questions in there, please let me know and we can certainly address those. Very good. Okay. All right. Excellent. Okay. All right. We've got some insights on what's been overshared. We're going to have insights on what some of that over permissioning is. Now we need some controls that we can put in place. So the scenario here is I've got a site, I've got broken inheritance on my site. I've got permissions that are nested deep in the site. I may have 1,000 libraries in the site. Each one of them has, 10,000 documents, and there may be permissions that have been granted accordingly or haphazardly on all of those sites. Going through and inventorying that, reducing the number of permissions, that can be a daunting task. Okay? So we've got some controls that will help you initially cut off access to all of that information, so that gives you some time to go through and review what those should be. One of those controls is a restricted access control. And what this control will do is, as you place it, the SharePoint administrators place it on the root of the site, and they also assign a security group to that policy. Only the members of that security group now have access to the content in that site, regardless of any broken inheritance, any direct permissions, any sharing links that I've created and sent out to all my friends. If I'm not in that security group, I don't get access to anything. So what this does is it helps you control who should have access to that site and gives you time to go and clean up the permissions accordingly. Also, what it does is Copilot recognizes that, hey, this site has that restricted access control policy applied to it. If you're not in that security group, then the content in that site will not be used in that Copilot experience to render any responses. Okay, so that is the huge benefit here. You've got sensitive information there. You got the payroll spreadsheet there. You got passport information there. You've got strategic documents that only leadership should see. And oh, by the way, somebody went in and broke permissions on a lot of these libraries, and you don't have time to go through each one of them, figure out what's going on, or use a partner tool. You need to cut off access right now. That's what this policy will do. We also see it using proactively. You're going to store some sensitive information on the site. Apply that policy to the site. That way, if an accident happens, somebody adds somebody to the visitors group, they share it with their best friends outside the organization, no problem. If they're not a member of that security group, again, they're not going to get access to it. So I call this the kill switch, because that's exactly what it does. Works on group-enabled sites. It also works on classic sites that you have in your SharePoint environment. Okay. All right. Other features that we have are block downloads. Again, if you want to apply this policy at the site level, any content that's in that site will not be downloaded on your local machine, anywhere that you can now take that and share it externally or even internally with some of the users in the organization. We also have the ability to block Teams meetings recordings. So if you need to control those meetings recordings, then this policy will prevent users from downloading that. What we're doing is, as a Teams meeting recording is being saved to OneDrive or that SharePoint site, we know it's a Teams meeting recording. We got telemetry that indicates that. That's how we're able to specify meeting recordings versus just a general MP4 file. Okay. You can specify exceptions to this. So if the site collection administrator or certain people still need to download it, you can download it, no problem. Where we also see this is if you want to control that user experience and keep them in the browser versus opening that Word document on the desktop, where they can then do a save as, and then you lose control of it. Apply this policy at the site level. When they try and download it and open it into the desktop application, that's a download activity. It's going to block it, forcing them to edit that document in the browser where you maintain control of it. So a lot of good use cases there that we're seeing around that block download policy. Okay. All right, I'm going to reground this back to our wheel. So we've got some policies that we can use once we've identified where some of that information is exposed. Last thing I want to focus on is that site lifecycle management. So what content is out there? And we've all got a lot of content. We've all got a lot of content that's old, but we still keep it. Okay. We could keep it for compliance reasons. We could keep it because we kind of forgot about it. Or we can keep it because we just don't delete anything. But that increases our risk. Also, it increases the amount of content that's exposed in Copilot. Because again, if I have permission to it, I'm going to be able to see it. I'm going to demonstrate this one straight away. So again, I'm back in the SharePoint Advanced Management feature set. And if I go to the Site Lifecycle Management feature, this is where I have the ability to create policies targeting specific sites in SharePoint. And this will be more relevant here in a second. First thing we want to focus on, though, is what is an inactive site? So an inactive site is not going to the SharePoint Admin Center and looking at the last modified date, because that could be a false positive. What we're looking at is not only the site, but also any activity on that dependent workload. For example, we've got Microsoft Teams, creates that companion SharePoint site. We may never put a file in that SharePoint site at all, giving us a false positive that, hey, the chat in the team is pretty active. I'm going to go ahead and delete it because there's no files in the SharePoint site. What we're doing is we're capturing telemetry on any activity that happens across that workload. If there's chat active in the team, great. The team's active. I don't want to delete the site because bad things are going to happen. Okay, so that's some telemetry that we're keeping in your tenant and have access to that's not publicly available. So that's where we're able to determine what that inactivity looks like. We also have ability to focus on specific types of sites. So once you set the duration of that policy, now you can focus and target specific sites in your tenant. If you want to create a policy that only focuses on team connected sites, Microsoft Teams created it, great. And also classic sites, but you don't want to focus on anything that's a communication site because it could be linked to a hub site with other site collections. Okay, so granularity on what type of sites you want to focus on. You can also filter by the creation source. A lot of folks are using PMP, PowerShell, an automated method to create that. Great, focus on those, or focus on just the Teams connected sites. When people create a lot of teams, creates a lot of sites. Only focus on those sites that have that inactivity. So this works to the advantage of, hey, I created this team, it sounded like a great idea, and 2 months later, nobody's touched it. Okay? Probably something that you want to clean up so that you can remove that from the environment accordingly. Okay. You've also got the ability to filter it by sensitivity label. Again, back to Purview, you've published these sensitivity labels. You now can apply that at the site level, protect the site. Any content that you add into the site is going to inherit that label when you add more content into it. So that's something that can be of benefit to you as well, but also focus on that from a lifecycle management. I want to focus on only the highly confidential ones that's got the most sensitive stuff. If it's not being used or inactive, let's get it out of there. So it's not exposed to Copilot. We're reducing our risk. Okay. Naturally, you can exclude specific sites. So, the HR site, executive committee sites, board sites, keep those forever. But you can also run this in simulation mode. Tell me how many sites or how many site owners this is going to go to. Because what will happen is as soon as we activate this, it's going to notify the site owners. Site owners are going to have an email with 2 buttons in it. You want to delete the site, or do you want to verify that this is good and continue using it within your environment? Okay. So there's going to be telemetry that will keep track of who has acted on that. You can track down the owners that are just kind of ignoring that email and ask them to act on that as well. Okay. But again, a lot of flexibility in the type of site that's there. Again, using those sensitivity labels accordingly at the site level and at the library level, it will then propagate down to the content that's in the library as well. Okay. For ownerless sites, so you'll notice I mentioned that it is going to the site owners. We are coming out with a policy that will allow you to identify ownerless sites. People have been added to the site, they left the organization, they're no longer an Entra ID, but you need a way to identify those people. Now you can do that and take control of it. So, Bruce, question?
Yes. On the previous screen, you were talking about creating an active sites policy and the scoping of that. Could it be the name of the site, like a specific prefix? Because we're trying to expire like sites related to project management, for example, project management SharePoint sites. Those have like a 5-year retention for us. But we haven't implemented sensitivity labels, so we can't use sensitivity labels. But how could we, could we do we name them the same, so that would help us. But what would you suggest scoping for this, for our projects?
Good. Yeah. Not the first time I heard this one, Bruce. So yeah, thanks for bringing it up.
Okay, sure. Sorry, I apologize for bringing it up.
No, I'm kidding you, of course. So yeah, naming convention is, we see that in libraries and documents and sites all over the board, right? So yeah, actively have heard that feedback. We are certainly taking that into account. One of the things that you could do initially is a PowerShell script to identify what breakout that name of the site, look for those keywords, patterns, and so forth. Get that so that now you can focus on those specific sites.
In this, would we create a site creation source called project sites?
Yeah. So once you have identified what those sites are, then create a sensitivity label called project sites.
Oh,
apply that
okay.
sensitivity label.
Gotcha.
Focus on that. You
Sure.
got it.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Fred, please, question.
Hi, so in related to that question, isn't there an option where you can apply a tag or a label to specific sites so that way I could specify, hey, if it's a tag called project management or a tag called capital projects type of thing, then you could apply some policy out of those tags.
Yeah. So Fred, are you specifically talking about adding a tag in the property bag of the site when it's created? Yeah. Yep. Totally have absolutely heard that feedback as well. again, a PowerShell script to identify that, put a sensitivity label on it, and only create a policy for those specific sites.
Yeah, my concern in
Yep.
using the sensitivity labels is you're kind of mixing up usage to the type of sensitivity of the site.
Yep.
That's gonna kind of cross things.
Yeah, but if you create just a kind of an empty sensitivity label and use it only for identification, then that could be a way of doing it. So, but yeah, along with the comment that Bruce made as well, having that type of functionality in the product, totally understand the direction.
Your account, and we will keep that up and everything. But it should only take about 15, 30 minutes max. Goes up.
I don't know if that was an accidental unmute, but Bruce, go ahead, please.
Just to follow up, your drop down there for site creation source, when you click that, is that customized? Can we put this here for Teams project sites?
Yep, I like where you're going here, Bruce. Right now it is a static list, and one of the kind of back to your point is
no, I agree with what he just said, that using it a sensitivity label to say this is not really, we'd have to apply that to every document on the site, then say it's related to a project, right? Or a project.
Well, just apply it to the site level.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you go here, let's check that out here really quick.
Yeah, we've implemented sensitivity labels for OneDrive, but not SharePoint yet. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So if you go to the settings of a particular site, then you can apply that. So if you just have a blank, empty sensitivity label, if you will, using it just for this purpose, assign it to the site and you're good to go.
But that doesn't apply the sensitivity label to the documents in the site?
Nope, just at the site level. So
okay,
yeah,
that's thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay. Yep. But yeah, good call out on having that incorporated into the product. Yeah, so absolutely, we've been looking at a lot of that feedback. All right. Okay. Some of the other features that are coming that I'm going to kind of take the last few minutes to round out here. Site attestation policy. So if you have a requirement that users need to review a site every 60 days, 90 days, and make sure that they are conforming to policy, then this site attestation policy is going to target that. Again, it'll send an email out to the site owner. They can go through the due diligence of making sure that that is according to policy. Other things that we have, we've got the ability to use some of the change history or the recent change actions. So imagine that today you have to go into Purview, you have to look at the audit log, and you have to see which site owner changed what in a particular site. This is now being brought into the SharePoint Admin Center. So you can go into the Admin Center and you can create a new policy. So let's look at that. If we go here, whoops, and if we go to change history, we can create new reports based on some parameters. So in this case, I want to have a specific date range. I want to focus on specific sites. So you have a site that you maybe want to audit, or there's something going on there. You want to see what the changes are, identify that specific site, and then look at only the admins that are in that site or specific people. Okay. Once you do that, now you're going to be presented with the change report. And that change report is not only going to have all the site information, but it will have the before and after change, who did it, date, time, everything that you would suspect there. Okay, so here is the output of that. Again, what is the site that I have? What's the action that I took? Okay, so I changed the sensitivity label. Okay, well, I changed it from what? Somebody may have downgraded it, they may have upgraded it, things like that. Who did it, and so forth. So now you can do that straight in the admin center without going into Purview or having someone do that for you in the Purview environment. Okay. So we've got just a couple minutes here, and I'll kind of pause for any thoughts, questions about anything that we've covered, both from a SharePoint Premium perspective, also from a SharePoint Advanced Management perspective.
Steve, thank you. Real quick, I don't want to cut anybody off if they have any last minute questions, but I did drop in chat. Our next session, approximately a month from now, is Knowing and Defending Your Data in the Age of Generative AI, Part 3 of our Compliance and Risk Controls for M365 Copilot. So that, again, will be on March 21st. And if you've missed any of these sessions or just jumped into this webinar series, I also posted the link for our YouTube channel where we put all the recordings to these sessions in there. So I apologize. If there are any last minute questions, feel free to come off mute and ask now.
Can you send those links via email as well? Because I don't have the ability to look at the chat.
Absolutely.
Oh, you know, it's funny. Steve's in the same boat, so we'll be glad to do that. And thank you for letting us know. We'll make sure we do that.
I don't have chat either.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up again. That's a new problem that it sounds like nobody sees it except for maybe some of us. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for notifying for that reason. We will put all those links in email. Thank you so much for sharing again.
Absolutely.
One maybe off-base question here, and that is, you've mentioned Copilot, but nothing about Azure OpenAI. Will there be integration to that, or is it possible?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And from an Azure OpenAI perspective, think of it as targeting the data sources that are going to feed into that Copilot, if you will. We're using Copilot here in a lot of broad senses, but if we're going to target a specific site or specific library that has information that we want to use in that Azure OpenAI, security is always going to be the foundation of what's going to be exposed. Okay, so again, very much like Copilot, if I've got access to this document, great, use it in that experience. If I don't, it's going to be removed. So that's, again, back to the basics and the foundation of how we want to secure and structure the content. So absolutely within scope there.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So everyone, we're about out of time. We can't thank you enough for joining us. We hope to see you on our next sessions. If there aren't any last minute questions, we'd definitely like to thank you for your participation and spending an hour with us today, either this morning or this afternoon. And again, we have the next session and the one after at least, tying Purview for data security and compliance back into generative AI. For Microsoft, of course, that means Copilot. So thanks again for joining, and we hope to see you in the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.